She stood still by the pool, her skin glistening from the afternoon sun, a striped towel clutched against her chest as a woman's finger jabbed the air between them like a drawn blade. The accusation hung in the air, laced with disbelief, entitlement, and the brittle sharpness of assumed authority. 2 police officers arrived within minutes, summoned by a voice that dripped with false concern. The call was clear. "There's someone here who doesn't belong." Whispers swirled among the onlookers as the officers approached, eyes scanning the scene for threat. Yet all they found was a woman in a swimsuit, holding nothing but calm. The older woman insisted she was trespassing, that someone needed to do something. But what she, and everyone else, failed to realize was that the woman being confronted not only lived behind that wrought iron gate, she also helped write the very laws these officers swore to uphold. Without raising her voice, she met the tension with composure and delivered a sentence that stopped time. "Before you say another word," she said, "you should know I'm your state senator. Tell us where you're watching from, because what follows is not just a confrontation. It's a lesson in restraint, in power, and in how dignity dismantles ignorance one truth at a time." The sun hung high over the manicured trees lining the edges of the private neighborhood pool, casting mirrored reflections off the water's surface. The setting was pristine. White lounge chairs arranged in perfect symmetry, potted flowers trimmed to suburban perfection, and a silence that spoke more of expectation than peace. Senator Alana Brooks moved through it with quiet grace, her shoulders relaxed but her senses sharp. At 39, she was the embodiment of what it meant to carry power with humility. Her journey had not been paved in privilege, but in perseverance, rising from community advocate to state senator through years of service, policy reform, and unshakable integrity. Yet here, in a neighborhood where image often mattered more than identity, she knew her presence would stir discomfort in the most polite of packages. She laid her towel across a chair near the deep end, adjusting at once, not for comfort, but for readiness. A simple act, but deliberate. Her swimsuit was elegant, her posture composed, and yet she could feel the sideways glances brush against her skin like mosquitoes, quiet but biting. She pulled out her phone, typed a quick message to her assistant, and hit send without hesitation. Some still think power looks only one way. Across the pool, Nancy Whitmore watched with thinly veiled suspicion. In her late 60s, Nancy had lived in the community for decades, held HOA board titles, and prided herself on knowing everyone who belongs. Her bias didn't wear a hood, it wore pearls, pastel linen, and a voice laced with politeness turned poison. Her concern wasn't about safety, it was about control. And when she saw Alana settle in without introduction, without asking, something inside her twitched with offense. She couldn't name it, but it burned. That quiet, unshaken confidence, how dare it exist uninvited? The pool, so polished and serene on the surface, mirrored the neighborhood itself. Elegant, structured, and pristine. But beneath that surface ran currents of entitlement, whispers of superiority, and a long legacy of deciding who was welcome and who was not. As Alana slid into the water, her strokes steady and graceful, she wasn't just cooling off. She was reclaiming space. Space she paid for. Space she earned. Space she had every right to inhabit. And yet she could feel it. Today, that quiet ripple of resistance would rise, not because of what she did, but because of who she was. She floated effortlessly for a moment, eyes closed to the sun, unaware that just a few steps away, a phone was being raised, a call was being placed, and a line was about to be crossed. Alana had just stepped out of the water, droplets tracing slow paths down her shoulders as she wrapped herself in the striped towel. She reached for her bag, casually retrieving her sunglasses, when she heard the clipped footsteps approaching. Nancy Whitmore, lips pressed into a thin line, walked toward her with the energy of accusation already in motion. "Excuse me," she began, her voice tight with false courtesy. "Are you a guest of someone here?" The question wasn't genuine. It was a challenge wrapped in sugar. Alana turned to face her, unfazed, offering a polite but firm response. "No, I live here, 2 houses down." Nancy's brow lifted, skepticism thick in her stare. "Oh, I wasn't aware of that. I know most of the residents here." The implication was clear. You don't fit the picture. Alana didn't flinch. "It's a new purchase. Moved in 3 months ago." Her voice remained steady, gracious even, but the atmosphere was already shifting. The silence between their words stretched wider than the pool. Nancy crossed her arms, her smile brittle. "Well, if you don't mind, I'm going. To verify that with the HOA. We've had issues before." The word hung heavy, coated in unspoken assumptions. Alana said nothing, watching Nancy walk a few feet away and pull out her phone. Not to call the HOA, but to dial 911. Her voice was audible, deliberately so. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person at the neighborhood pool. African-American woman, doesn't appear to live here." Around the pool, conversations stopped. Sunglasses lowered. Pages of books froze mid-turn. Alana stood there, towel clutched loosely in one hand, as 2 patrol cars pulled up minutes later. The quiet hum of authority rolled in with the sound of tires on pavement. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, approaching slowly. Everyone watched. No one spoke. "Ma'am," one officer said, walking toward Alana, "we received a call about a possible trespasser." His tone was not overtly hostile, but it carried the caution reserved for someone assumed guilty. Alana looked at him squarely, her posture straight, not defensive. "I live here," she said, her voice calm as stone. "My name is Alana Brooks." She reached for her bag, but not for ID, just to steady herself, towel still wrapped around her. The second officer interjected, "We'll need to see identification." That was the moment. Alana didn't move. She looked directly into the officer's eyes, her voice unwavering. "Before I do that," she said slowly, "do you know who I am?" The words didn't rise. They landed. The officer blinked, taken, off guard. The air between them thickened. Nancy stood nearby, arms folded, eyes narrowing in confusion. Around the pool, people leaned in, instinctively sensing a shift in gravity. Alana hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a scene. But in that one sentence, she'd called the room and the moment to attention. Alana didn't move at first. She stood in the center of the tension, letting the silence speak louder than the whispers that had surrounded her just minutes earlier. The officers stood waiting, one of them shifting his weight uncomfortably, his badge glinting in the sun. Nancy's arms remained crossed, though her confidence had started to falter, her smirk replaced by creeping uncertainty. Everyone was watching. Dozens of eyes trained on a black woman in a swimsuit, towel wrapped around her body like armor, daring to remain still while the world around her demanded explanation. Then, with slow deliberation, Alana reached into her bag. Not rushed, not defensive. Each movement was purposeful. Her fingers found what she was looking for, and she pulled out a sleek leather case. With a flick of her wrist, she opened it, revealing an official gold badge and laminated credentials beneath the seal of the state senate. She held it up, not for theatrics, but for truth. "My name," she said, voice calm and resonant, "is Senator Alana Brooks, elected by the people of this state, including the one standing right here." The words hit harder than any accusation. The first officer took an involuntary step back, his face draining of color. The second froze, jaw slackening as his eyes locked onto the badge. Even Nancy, who had moments ago felt so certain in her assumptions, faltered visibly. She took a half-step back, her mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came. All around the pool, the onlookers sat stiffly in their loungers, suddenly aware that the woman they had quietly judged now held more authority than anyone else present. One officer tried to recover. "Ma'am, we didn't know," he stammered. Alana didn't blink. She met his gaze with steady precision and replied, "That's the problem." Her voice hadn't risen. She hadn't accused. And yet, in that moment, the balance of power shifted entirely. The pool, once filled with the hum of summer conversation, now sat in breathless stillness. Nancy swallowed hard, her hand fluttering toward her chest. I didn't mean. I was just concerned." Alana turned her head slightly, meeting Nancy's eyes, not with hatred but with something far more powerful. Disappointment. "Concern," she said softly, "doesn't start with assumptions. And it shouldn't end with a phone call to the police." She turned her attention back to the officers. "I suggest you take a walk around the neighborhood. You'll see my name on the mailbox, and my face on the campaign flyers many of these residents voted for." The officers nodded slowly, the bravado drained from their posture. They offered awkward apologies, which Alana didn't accept nor reject. She didn't need to. Her composure had already delivered the message. As the officers backed away and returned to their patrol cars, the poolside remained silent. No one dared to meet her eyes. The same neighbors who had watched so eagerly, waiting for a spectacle, now stared at their towels, their drinks, the water, anywhere but at her. And, through it all, Alana remained still, her presence commanding not through noise but through undeniable truth. She had walked into that space as herself and had been asked to justify her existence. But she had answered not with anger, but with clarity, not with confrontation, but with fact. And that, more than anything, shook the very foundation of the assumptions built around her. The tension hadn't left the air. It had only thickened into something more humbling. The officers lingered awkwardly by the pool's edge, unsure of their next move, while Nancy's face paled beneath the soft sunlight. Her once confident stance had crumbled, replaced with a nervous fidgeting of her hands and darting glances that searched for an exit but found only consequence. Alana stood centered in it all, still wrapped in her towel, still barefoot beside the shimmering water, but now radiating a presence that dwarfed every person around her. She wasn't finished. From her bag she pulled a second item. A folded document, slightly creased at the edges, bearing the state's official seal across the top. She held it gently, almost reverently, and extended it to the officer who had asked for her ID. He accepted it with hesitation, eyes scanning the bold title printed in capital letters, State of Georgia Anti-Discrimination and Equal Access Reform Act. I wrote this, Alana said softly, her voice carrying across the pool deck with more force than a raised fist. Signed into law last year. You just tried to violate it. The officer blinked, swallowing hard. The irony wasn't lost on him, nor on the bystanders now leaning in to listen. The woman who had been accused of trespassing, who had been eyed with suspicion and condescension, was the very architect of the protections his badge was sworn to uphold. A soft gasp escaped from Nancy, her hand rising to her lips. The paper in the officer's hands now felt heavier, weighted by more than just ink and legislation. It was a mirror, and it reflected failure. Alana didn't press the moment with anger. She didn't need to. She turned her gaze to Nancy, who took a step forward as if to speak. Her mouth opened, but before she could form words, Alana lifted her chin and met her eyes with a look so sharp, so clear, that it halted any apology in its tracks. Nancy stopped cold, understanding immediately. Some things didn't need to be said, and some damage couldn't be undone by rushed regret. I live 2 doors down, Alana said instead, her voice gentle but edged with a truth that cut deeper than any reprimand. But I've walked miles through judgment to get there. The silence that followed was no longer filled with shock. It was filled with realization. The setting, once symbolic of exclusivity and silent prejudice, had transformed. The pristine poolside, the neatly aligned chairs, the summer air once thick with assumption, now all bore witness to a reversal not written in fiction, but forged in lived experience. The officers mumbled apologies once more, their eyes lowered, their authority dismantled not by confrontation, but by quiet truth. Nancy took another step back, her posture deflating under the weight of who Alana truly was. And Alana, still wrapped in her towel, didn't ask for respect. She didn't demand reverence. She simply stood in the full depth of her identity, powerful, poised, and unshaken. Because sometimes the greatest twist isn't when power shifts. It's when the truth finally arrives wearing nothing but a swimsuit and the strength of its own story. Days passed, but the ripples from that afternoon didn't fade. They widened. The story reached the mayor's office, the state house, and eventually the office of the local police chief, who scheduled a quiet but pointed meeting with Senator Alana Brooks. In the confines of his paneled office, away from cameras and polite smiles, Alana sat across from him with the same composure she'd carried poolside. She didn't raise her voice or ask for heads to roll. Instead, she recommended something far more lasting: mandatory racial bias training for all officers in the district, including leadership. Not as punishment, she said calmly, but as prevention. The chief nodded, shame flickering across his face, and made a note on his pad without resistance. He knew the weight of her words. He also knew they came not from outrage, but from responsibility. The training was implemented within weeks. Officers Bradshaw and Kelly, the same two who had responded to the pool call, sat in the front row of the first session. They listened this time. Truly listened. The slideshow didn't shame them. It showed them. Showed how bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers from behind badges and inside assumptions. By the end of the month, both men had requested reassignment to community outreach programs, volunteering to speak in schools about law, respect, and the danger of letting a uniform replace understanding. Nancy Whitmore, meanwhile, found herself at the center of something she had never anticipated: public accountability. Her neighbors, many of whom had silently agreed with her that day, now found themselves uncomfortable with their silence. The HOA issued a formal statement denouncing her actions. Friends stopped waving. Invitations stopped arriving. Under growing pressure, Nancy drafted a letter of apology, carefully written, formally addressed, and sent with trembling hands to Alana's home. But Alana never replied. She didn't need to. Some lessons, she told her assistant one morning over coffee, aren't for applause. They're for accountability. And then the summer rolled on. Weeks later, on a quiet Saturday, Alana returned to the neighborhood pool. Same swimsuit, same towel, same quiet confidence. This time there was no confrontation, no side eyes, just the usual chatter of children splashing and adults flipping pages in paperbacks. She walked through the gate with her head high and shoulders relaxed, placing her towel on the same chair as before. When she turned toward the water, she noticed a little black girl standing in the shallow end, floaties around her arms and curls bouncing above the surface. The girl stared for a second, then lit up with recognition. "Mommy," she whispered, tugging on her mother's arm. "That's her. That's our senator." Her mother smiled, meeting Alana's eyes with a silent nod of gratitude. Alana smiled back, heart warmed not by recognition, but by what it meant. It meant the space had changed, that the water was no longer cold with judgment, that the little girl would grow up knowing that she belonged, not just in neighborhoods like this, but in every room, every seat, every level of leadership. Elena dropped her towel without ceremony, stepped to the pool's edge, and slid into the water with ease, unbothered, unshaken, and entirely free. Not just because she'd proven herself, but because she never should have had to. In a place where privilege once drowned out truth, Senator Alana Brooks reclaimed space, not through shouting, not through force, but by simply standing in her truth. She didn't need to announce her title, didn't need to retaliate with anger. She revealed who she was with quiet confidence, letting her presence speak louder than prejudice. And in that moment, the assumptions surrounding her collapsed under the weight of reality. Because power doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a swimsuit, carries a badge of honor, and knows the law better than the ones called to enforce it. Alana didn't just defend herself. She reminded everyone watching that dignity doesn't have to raise its voice to be heard. Have you ever been questioned simply for being, for existing in a space someone else decided wasn't yours? Share your experience below. If this story moved you, pass it on. Let it ripple. Because silence never changed anything. But courage always does. More real stories. More real change. Coming soon.